Okay, we're back, and our special guest is Amir George. He's an international columnist and college professor, and he's authored a book that is pretty fascinating, Liberating Iraq, the Untold Story of Iraq's Assyrian Christians. There's a picture of it there on the screen for those watching on theDove TV, and let me encourage you to check it out at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, online. And Amir, are we Skyping you in from a bunker in Japan?
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, nice to have you. First of all, on my wife's side of the family, they were Assyrian Christians.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. From one undisclosed location to another.
There we go. There we go. Well, what provoked you to write this book?
Well, I think a big part of it was, for those, probably a lot of your viewers as well, most people don't realize that 2.5 million Americans served in Iraq at one point or another. And for those of us that were there, we all kind of waited for someone to tell the story, and they never did. And that's probably what was the original genesis for it. But the other part was, and the title of the book, which is Liberating Iraq, is a kind of a play on words, because we, the Liberating Iraq that everybody knows about is kind of looked on as a failure, and we bungled it, and we pulled out too early, and it's just one big mess, right?
Right. But
there was a second liberation, and that was 2.5 million Americans, mostly young kids. Just, tears come, when you start to think of just the different examples of what they were doing. But they fanned out over a country that had been destroyed. Right. By 40 years of Saddam's terror, and they just loved these people back. And that second liberation was a resounding success. So we really wrote the book, first of all, to say thank you to the families of the 4,888 who lost their lives. Mm-hmm. Over 32,000 were injured. And we're working to present a book to each of those families, but also to hear from the 2.5 million who served, with all their stories of what did happen that nobody seems to have heard about.
Beautifully said, and especially on the eve of Veterans Day coming up, the first of the week. Let me ask you this, Amir. Tell us, just describe from your perspective, who is the Assyrian Christian?
Well, this is another thing that people probably don't realize, but Iraq was originally the nation of Assyria, which was the first Christian nation, the first nation to accept the gospel and become a Christian nation. And it was from Iraq, essentially, that missionaries went throughout the world. The gospel was first preached to China, to most of Asia, to Europe, from those Assyrian Christians. And it's an interesting turn of events that most of us at some point in time can point to our faith coming from the Assyrians, mm-hmm. and now history is reversed and they're the ones that need help. It's a very interesting historic as well as a spiritual journey. So during the Iraqi war, how were the Assyrian Christians liberated? I mean, what happened to them as a result of Saddam Hussein being taken out? Even though we bundled the war at the end, how are they liberated? Yeah, and that's kind of a tough one. It's the catch-22 where I was there under Saddam's time. It was hell. If the phone rang, the whole family went into a panic. He took a taxi home. Who was the driver? What did you say to them? And people it was just a living hell. Nearly 1 million people lost their lives. And I think my uncle, I think we mentioned in the book, but one of my uncles kept saying, he said, my grandson gets up every morning, goes to school, studies about Saddam Hussein. He says, I would be happy if whatever it took to get rid of him. There were 2 TV channels, Saddam 1 and Saddam 2. You woke up in the morning and went to bed at night, and everything was Saddam. He was on the money. He was a statue outside. He was on TV. And for the Christians, it was a very difficult situation as well. They were allowed freedom within the church itself, but from then on out, anything that they did that was even the slightest bit, difficult for the government, they would be hauled off. People would just disappear. So now, as difficult as things are, and nobody is saying that they're not, freedom is an incredible thing. And we had an interesting conversation, I remember one day, where a bunch of people were together and everyone was complaining. They were complaining about the traffic. It takes an hour to go what used to take 10 minutes. Right. And I remember looking around, I said, guys, that's what happens when freedom comes. Did you even have a car before? So times are tough, especially for the Christians, because many escaped to Syria, to Egypt and other areas, and then especially those in Syria are in a difficult position. But going forward, in spite of the difficulties, freedom is a tremendous difference. Right.
You write in the book about weapons of mass destruction, and obviously under Saddam Hussein's dictatorial rule, they were used, but when we got in there, they couldn't be found. What's your take on all that?
Well, rather than my take, there was a press conference where the Iraqi foreign minister was speaking, and I'll never forget that. It was in the book, I think. After he finishes, they take time for questions, and a reporter went up to the mic, and as we used to hear, it just became almost routine. He opened his question by saying to the foreign minister of Iraq, he said, "First of all, I would like to apologize to you on behalf of my country for invading without reason and destroying your country." And he went on, and suddenly in the middle of his question, the Iraqi foreign minister slammed his hand on the podium, and he said, "Sit down." And he said, "Invading?" He said, "How can you use a word like that?" He said, "My people were liberated from a monster who had killed over 1 million of our people, destroyed our nation." And then he went on to say, "And weapons?" He said, "Which ones would you like me to describe? The ones that were driven into the desert across the border into Syria, or the ones that had been flown into Iran?" So the situation was apparently, and this is obviously a catch-22 situation, but right. It seems to be that they were a lot of things were discovered, but they were people forget that previously Iraq was an ally of the West against Iran, right. And a lot of things were discovered, and a lot of those things were things that had been gotten from the West. So it was a catch-22 to find them.
Was the liberation of Kurdistan somewhat a hope for the Assyrian Christians trapped inside Iraq?
Yes, Iraq is essentially 4 countries. Some people might remember the Biden plan. That time Senator Biden, now Vice President Biden, put together a plan essentially to allow Iraq to fall into its 4 main groups. In the south you have Shiistan, Sunnistan, Kurdistan, and then you have Assyria. So the one area of Iraq that is incredibly safe is in fact Kurdistan. But and this is if there's a good news through this all, is that the Iraqi government, the regional governments, everybody essentially has agreed that the Assyrians should be given a province of their own. And so for those people that are praying and concerned about the Christians in Iraq as well as the Middle East, the solution is an area. I did an interview with a Jewish rabbi a while back, and I'll never forget what he said. He put it in a very easy to understand way. He said, I don't understand the Christians. He said, they support Israel, they love Israel so much, which we are happy for. He said, but we have our own land. He said, we have our own government, we have our own army. He said, but the Christians of the Middle East have no government, they have no land, they have no army, they have nobody to protect them. And he said, the best way that Christians can help Israel is to help their fellow Christians in the Middle East who suffer so terribly. And I think that's an interesting point. But in Iraq, even the current prime minister, as well as virtually every government official, has agreed that the Assyrian Christians should be allowed to have a province of their own. And if we can accomplish that, then they'll be able to come back. They don't have to escape to to Syria and other countries. So that's really the long-term goal that people that are watching could be very supportive of.
All right, the book is entitled Liberating Iraq, the Untold Story of Iraq's Assyrian Christians by Amir George. And let me encourage you to check it out. There's a picture of it there on the screen, and you may want to get this at the bookstores. I got about a minute left, Amir. Let me ask you this. Are you pretty much traveling and lecturing on this topic?
Well, right now we're working very hard to find, if someone's watching today, and you have a family member that gave their life in Iraq, or you served in Iraq and you've been injured, we're trying to get a book to you. We'd like to present a book to each of those families.
Okay.
And also, if you're watching and you served in Iraq, we're compiling a second book on all those experiences. So we'd love to hear from the audience, and especially from those that lost a family member, because we want to say thank you.
How do they contact you?
They can go to liberatingiraq.com,
okay,
and they can sign up to receive a book or to tell their story. And thank you for having us.
Oh, wait, before I let you go, I got 30 seconds. Do you still have family in Iraq?
Absolutely, and we talk to them all the time. It's the best of times, and it's the worst of times.
I can imagine. Amir, thank you. You're in our prayers. Thanks. Keep up the good work. Let's get together soon.
Thank you for having us.
Okay. Again, the book is entitled The Untold Story of Iraq, Assyrian Christians, Liberating Iraq, The Untold Story of Iraq's Assyrian Christians. Check it out at the bookstores. We'll see you next time on Focus Today.